talking about the subject of family systems theory. Now you might not have thought about it, but all the counseling maybe you've taken before has been oriented at what? The individual person, right? Normally when we tend to think about it from psychology, how do we tend to look at things? We look at it from the individual person. You have a problem, right? You're struggling with this problem, and if we fix you, then everything's going to be fine, right? Well, how many of you realize that there's a whole other area that we haven't really looked at, and that is how people interact in systems? And this probably started around the 1960s and 70s. There were a group of people in America that began to say, no, the problem isn't in the individual. The problem is in the entire system of how the people are relating together, and there are not just dysfunctional ways in the person, there are dysfunctional ways in the system. And that has eventually led over a lot of years and a lot of controversy and so on into what is now called marriage and family therapy today. And it's basically all based on systems theory that have come out of a number of different theorists, or a number of different ways of looking at this. It continues to evolve, but there's some basic things here. So today, instead of looking at the individual, or looking even at just the marriage, we're going to talk about looking at the overall system. Now, what is a system? It's a whole bunch of different parts that interact together, right? And that's what we're going to look at. But first, let's start by looking at some very critical things in systems theory. Then we're going to put it together and talk about some of these different theories and try and teach you some things that you can really use. The first one is perception. How many of you ever heard the story about the blind man looking at the elephant? And these blind men are going around, there's an elephant standing there. And they all describe the elephant differently, don't they? One of them goes up there and he grabs on the trunk and it moves, and he says, "This is like a snake." Another guy grabs the tail. "This is like a broom." Another guy grabs one of the legs. "This is like a tree." Well, are they wrong? No, they're just seeing different aspects of the elephant. How many of you know there's a lot more to an elephant than the leg or the trunk or the tail? It's the same thing here. In counseling and working with people, how many of you know there's a whole lot more to this subject than the individual people and how they've looked at it? Of course, the analogy is what? Maybe the psychologist is the one that is just looking at what the elephant thinks. And the marriage and family therapist now is trying to do what? We want to look at the entire elephant and see when we put the trunk and the tail and the feet and the thinking all together, what do we end up with? What's the limitation? The limitation is they tend to go the other direction too far into looking at the system and ignoring the individual parts of the system. So what are you going to need? A combination of it all, right? There's always the balance in the middle of where everything comes together. So we have perception. A term we use here is a paradigm change. What does that mean? The way you look at life, and this is a very big thing in Christian counseling. What is our paradigm in Christian counseling? That there is a God of the universe, there are absolutes, and Jesus came and died on the cross to pay the price for our sins. That's our paradigm. That's the way we look at the world. We look at the world that there's a devil, there's good, there's evil, they struggle. That's the way we look at the world. There are other people who look at the world very differently than that, aren't there? Some people look at the world all negative out of their experience. And some people say, well, everyone is good. There's just accept everything. Que sera, sera, right? So we have a lot of different ways of looking at this. We also have lenses and filters that are developed in our family of origin. Where do you get your idea of how you see your world? from your family, whatever happened in your family. Do you realize that kids in a domestically violent family think that that's what the whole world is like? And they have no clue there's anything else out there until they meet some friends and say, "You mean your parents don't beat each other up every night? What's wrong with your family?" It's not exciting, right? Some other things, some other issues are what's called transference and countertransference. What is that? You are part of the system as a counselor or as a pastor. When you're sitting there, and by the way, if anyone wants to be a senior pastor here, let me warn you something about being a senior pastor. Everybody that has a problem with people in authority are going to have an issue with you. Why? Because you're the senior authority. That's called transference. They're going to transfer their issues with their dad or with their mom onto you, and they're going to have a conflict with you before you even open your mouth. What's countertransference? When one of your clients has problems similar to problems that you have had, and so now it's triggering you when they talk about their issues. See those terms? Perceptions determine the success or failure. People tend to do what you expect them to do, or what they expect out of life. Inner perceptions come from childhood. That's a lot of the theophostic, the inner child work of trying to take those perceptions. Is it the event that happened to them? Is that the problem? No, what's the problem? The problem is how they look at the event. Do you see how perceptions is coming into everything? We'll tie that all together. We're now going to look at everything, the family as a system. That's how we're going to perceive things in this particular class. First, a system is a set or arrangement of things so related as to form a whole. It's a set of facts, rules, arranged to show as a plan, an established orderly way of doing something, a body or a number of bodily organs functioning as a unit. Each part of the system has its own parts and they're connected in certain ways. In family systems, the focus is more on the process of interaction in the family currently than the content of the interaction. In family systems, we're going to see later on one of the Bowen theory, a theory that's called Bowen theory, for guy named Bowen, okay, deals with going back into the family of origin and looking at the system in the past. But normally in family systems, you're looking at the here and now. When you're counseling, what are you looking at? First, you bring the whole family in. You bring everybody involved in instead of just the individual. And then you are looking at how they react and how they interact with each other in that particular session. And sometimes you get very interesting things, like one of them get mad and they'll stop and they'll get up and they'll walk out of your counseling session. Well, what did you learn? If you're looking at their problem, say, well, they got a problem. But if you're looking at the system, what do you say? That's just how they reacted to that particular part of the system. Another part of this, each adjustment of one component requires an adjustment of another part of the system to balance the system. This is sort of the way a systems person would look at it. Let's just say I'm counseling somebody and one of them, usually the guy, shows no emotions at all, and the lady is just an emotional basket case. Everything is affecting her. She's all over the place. Now, individually, how do we look at it? Well, maybe we have a codependent, independent, codependent, dependent, maybe different attachment styles. But we look at that as a system, what would we say? The woman's job is to handle all the emotions of the system. That's the way they related this thing. Do you see what I'm saying? They'd say this is out of balance, but it's out of balance because it works good that way. You get a person, they have no emotions, who they're going to want to marry? Somebody that has emotions. Another one is what we call an over-under responsible marriage. What's that? One person is overly responsible for everything, so the other person doesn't have to be responsible for anything. You see, a system says one balances the other, and we're looking at the overall system. We focus more on the process of the interactions of the family rather than the content of the interaction. Okay, this leads to this, which leads to this. That's a system. Acting out is only a symptom of the problem which the counselor is to find. Let's take another example. This would be what we call reframing here in a little bit. Let's just take a situation. You have, the parents are thinking about getting a divorce. And one of the kids who is getting straight A's in school now is getting straight F's, and is throwing temper tantrums and breaking stuff and doing all sorts of horrendous stuff. Taking drugs, stealing stuff. Well, if you look at that individually, what do we look at? This kid has a problem, right? In fact, in systems theory, that's called the identified patient. What's the idea? Everyone identifies this person as having the problem, but that's not the problem. The problem is the entire system. How would systems theory look at this? Wow, what a wonderful kid. Because this kid is acting as a lightning rod, so the parents won't fight and won't get divorced. It forces the parents to work together as a team to solve the kid's problem. And the kid is just trying to save his family. You see a different perspective? Basic concepts. The whole versus the parts. Instead of looking at the individual parts, we look at the big picture of it. Second, the identified patient. I already mentioned the scapegoat or the black sheep. They carry the symptoms of the family. In systems theory, we don't say, that kid has a problem, let's go fix that kid. We say the reason that kid is acting that way is because of other stuff that is going on in the family. We give you another case. I had a young lady that was brought in for counseling because she was a cutter. She was taking razor blades and cutting herself up. And she was doing all sorts of stuff. She was the identified patient of the family. And that's the way the family looked at it, right? However, when we started looking a little bit more, it turned out that the dad had a pornography problem. And the mom had a control problem. As we got more into it, it turned out that the good girl of the family, the sister, was in a homosexual affair with her teacher. Nobody would identify that, do you see what I'm saying? But all these other acting out was a response to the other issues that were going on in the family that no one wanted to face. And there had been all sorts of warnings that something was going on and they had all been ignored. So from the family system standpoint, what was my client doing? She was trying to change the family system. Of course, she was trying to use me in the process by letting me know this, that I was the one that had to identify this in the family and go through all the conflict and all the kind of stuff to try to work this out. And of course, what her hope was what? That if the sister went down, she'd go up, right? We'd change the roles in the family. And all sorts of conflicts, and there were all sorts of deep-rooted problems inside of this family that were going on that no one was willing to deal with. But when you finally got a whole identified patient and looked at that and said, now what's going on? Why is she cutting? What's the emotional pain? And it is so strong that she would rather physically cut herself to stop that pain. Then we eventually found the pieces and the interactions within the family. And that would have been a family that would have been much better to have dealt with the entire family. I did bring more of them in, you see what I'm saying? To have them then face those different issues. But that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Another term, homeostasis. Homeostasis means that the system will try to come back to the way it was before. And you see this in counseling all the time. You help this couple and you help them to set boundaries and so on and so forth, and they do pretty good for a while, right? But then they are done counseling and you see them a year later. What's happened? The boundaries have all disappeared and they're back doing exactly what they were doing before when they came to you. Why? Because the system tries to make itself go back. If you don't keep those boundaries in line, the system's going to go back to the way it was before. It's sort of like this. Here's a system. It's all locked together, right? Well, we take this finger and we try and move it, right? How hard is it going to be to move? Or like that. What are you going to have to do to change this system? See, we can do that, we can do that, we can move that finger, we can do these, and so on, but the system isn't going to change. What do we have to do? The term is called destabilization. Sometimes in systems you have to do what? To put the system back together in a different way. And that's one of the methods called structural counseling. Do you think people like to have their system? What does their system do? Make them feel secure, right? So how many people want you as the counselor to mess up their entire system and make them have to realign their entire life in some other way? Another term that's critical is called differentiation. Remember we said everybody looks at this elephant in different ways? Well, guess what? Everybody has different terms for the same things on the elephant. What does differentiation have to do? Our term would be codependency. See, a person that is not adequately differentiated doesn't have an identity, right? Like a codependent dependent? They're too locked into something? So they have different terms like that. They would say they're too enmeshed in their relationship. That would be a term for a codependent dependent. And differentiation means, do they have the balance between being too dependent or being too independent? That's the term. Are they differentiated? Are they a whole person? Do they have an identity? The dependent person says, I cannot function without you. It's like a series circuit in lights. How many know anything about electricity? When you get these little lights you put in your Christmas tree, the real old ones, what would happen if one of the bulbs went out? The entire chain goes out. Well, that is the person that is too dependent. Do you see that? All the lights have to be on for the system to work. The next type would be the independent. Says what? I don't need you, I'm one light. But the other term that we're looking for, interdependence, the term that they would use for this, the Bible uses righteousness, so we would consider that to be a healthy or a non-codependent situation, is like parallel lights. How are parallel lights? If one goes out, the other lights keep burning. See the picture? Extended family feel. Those are all the relatives. In different cultures, all the relatives are a lot closer, or all the relatives are a lot farther, but what do we need? The core of the family has to have a boundary around it, and you have to watch for the relationship with the extended family field coming in here. And then we have emotional triangle. What's an emotional triangle? Have you an idea? Let's say the two of you over there are having a conflict, okay? And you want to win the conflict. So you bring Loretta in on your side to tell her to do what's right. Ever see that in a relationship? Ever see where the parents got brought in, especially in a marital deal, or the kids get brought in? Now, what's the function of that in the system? What does that do to the system from a counseling point of view? It makes it impossible to resolve the issue. Because you now have to get that other person to agree And the more people we add into this system, the more we rely and bring a triangle. See, two people, you can do what? You can get them to face each other. So why would I want to bring somebody else in? Because I don't want to face it. I don't want to resolve this. It actually stops the resolution of the system when we have an emotional triangle. So one of the jobs of the counselor is what? Break up emotional triangles, that they don't continue. The third party must be detriangulated before progress can be made. When the relationship is stuck, it's usually because of an emotional triangle. So if you're in counseling and you can't seem to work on something, see who else is involved in this. Never fight against the third part of the triangle. It only makes it tighter. These are basic system rules. See, if you try to kick the other one out, I made a mistake one time in trying to get the mother-in-law out of the picture. And this lady was so dependent that her mother-in-law came over, cleaned her house for her, took care of her kids for her, did everything. How well do you think it worked to try and get the mother-in-law out of the picture? Mother-in-law wasn't leaving. In fact, they ended up being divorced. Easier to get rid of the husband than it was to get rid of the mother-in-law. The third party will express the stress or the dis-ease of the conflict between the two. Another problem with this is if I bring somebody else in, even if I resolve it over here, have I resolved that issue? No, they take an issue with the whole thing and they express. But if you talk to this third party, you'll find out a lot about what's going on between the two of them. The key to success is understanding the process going on and become part of the relationship, yet remain a non-anxious presence. What are they saying? How can you change a triangle like that? You can join in. What if we now have 4 people in the system? Do you have a triangle? No, we don't. So there are all sorts of different techniques and issues that are dealt with here. The purpose is to avoid facing their conflict with each other when highly charged emotional issues are involved. The triangle cannot exist unless someone initiates it and the other accepts it. So what's that telling us? If you don't accept the triangle, if you don't allow that power to be there, if you don't accept it, this can't happen. So it's a collusion type thing. Due to a lack of differentiation of themselves in their present relationship. So the core issue comes down, we look at the system, we see they're bringing a triangle in. What does it tell us? What are we dealing with? The core issue is inside the person themselves. They're not adequately differentiated. Or could we say codependent? But the idea is you look at the whole system, and then from the system you figure out what's going on. That's what we're dealing with here. Feedback loops. Feedback loop means I'm not in isolation. It means if I do something, you're going to react to it, and that's my feedback for what I did, right? And from that feedback, I can figure out what's going on. These are all analysis ways and ways of looking at the overall systems. Reframing, I already mentioned. Reframing simply means we look at it differently. We say, what a wonderful son you have. He's getting straight F's and has been shoplifting now for weeks. Because he's sacrificing his own reputation and his own school to save your marriage. That changed the perspective a little bit. Birth order. How many of you heard of birth order? Well, what is birth order? It's part of systems, isn't it? Because what do they say? The first kid has a particular role in the system, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and they're different, and they react to each other. What are the kids trying to do in the system based on birth order? Find their place, make themselves secure, but it's based on what the system looks like. What does the firstborn child look like? And by the way, when somebody comes in, I'll always ask them, which kid were you in the family? Why do I ask that? What if in this couple I have 2 firstborns? What's going to happen? Power struggle. Why? Because what does the firstborn look like? Perfectionistic, reliable, conscientious, a list maker, organized, serious, scholarly, and task-oriented. Why? They're the first kid. They got to make their way. They got to figure this thing all out. Now realize they can be supplanted by another kid. The middle-born usually is a mediator, avoider of conflict, independent, loyal to peers, friends, and a maverick. The last born, manipulative, charming, blames others, shows off, a people person, good salesperson, precocious, engaging. But see, it all makes sense when you think about it from a system perspective, doesn't it? The first kid is the pioneer. There's no one else to help them. They got to figure this whole thing out and get it organized, right? The second kid, the first one's already got that area set. So the second kid's going to try to relate to people and try to make things work out. And the third kid is trying to find their place in the family some way. So they're going to manipulate and try and work things so they can find all of the two main areas already taken. So that's why this important thing of looking at the system of how they fit. What happens though if the second kid, whose job is to supplant the first one, succeeds? Then the second kid's going to look a lot like a first child. What if you're the only child? You're going to look a lot like a first child because there were no other children in this overall system. What's going on? They're trying to fulfill their needs. Other issues in birth order, spacing. How many years in between? Most conflicts are one to about, say, 2 years apart. That's where you get the most conflict, 1 to 2 years apart. The sex of the child makes a difference. Physical differences. Position of their parents in their family of origin. Blended families. Relationship between parents. All affect this thing. So it's not as, no, the kid, every firstborn looks exactly like this. No, there are all these other factors that come in here too. They fulfill certain basic needs. The first child is performance expectation. The second child is emotional needs. The third child is the best symbol of what is going on in the family. So if you want to look, you got a whole family, who do you look at? The third child, if there are three. The fourth, unification needs of the family. And the fifth is the first, like the firstborn. So every four, we go back to the beginning, like a firstborn again. And we start over again, going through this entire sequence. Anyway, that's sort of the theory of that, okay? Realize I'm giving you an overview of systems theories. I'm giving you different theories and different ways of looking at things. Next one is personality style. The suggestion is 85% of your personality is set by age 6. I've also heard 80% set by age 8. But someplace in that ballpark, you get your personality from your system in which you live and the role you take on in that system. What is the personality? Just how you cope with life, the way you function in life. And there are some standard ones, and there are a number of different ones. I'll just give you the standard one here. How many of you have heard of the caloric personality? What does it look like? Self-willed, productive, decisive, visionary with a compulsive need to change, opinionated, cruel, unable to relax, unsympathetic, never gives up. Sanguine, outgoing, talkative, warm, friendly, expressive, undisciplined, controlled by circumstances, compulsive talkers. Phlegmatic, likable, dependable, status quo, conservative, sympathetic, unmotivated, stubborn, stingy, unenthusiastic, and indecisive. You notice something? There are good things about each one of these, and there are bad things about each one of these. Melancholy, analytical, perfectionistic, sensitive, serious, artistic, moody, critical, rigid, touchy, legalistic. Now, how much does that really affect your counseling? Different people have different ideas of how much effect that really has on your counseling. Again, looking at the elephant. Some people think the most important thing is the head of the elephant. Some people think the legs are more important. We have that same thing we're looking at here. Now let's look at the basic theories and approaches to family therapy. Okay, I've given you some overviews of the pieces. Now let's go through the basic different approaches of what they have to say. Now first, the first thing is what's called psychodynamic approach. How many of you have heard about that? Where does that term come from? Freud. That's more the psychology type of thing. My daughter goes to Biola, okay, her PhD in psychology, and they're a psychodynamic school. What's psychodynamic have to do with? Insight. Well, this is happening because of this happened to you, and this is going on here. They try and figure out the insights. The communication approach. How the parts interact. These are the rules of the family. A communication therapist would do what? They watch what's going on in the family and how everybody reacts to everybody else. And by the way, to give you some names here, you don't have to memorize all these names, just so you have an idea if any of you have any background in here. This is Don Jackson, Virginia Satire, and Jay Haley. Then we have the structural approach. Structural approach is we're going to change the structure of the system. This is Murray Bowen, David Cantor, Salvador Minuchin. These are, by the way, in this particular area, just, we're giving you a glimpse of a whole other world here. But in this world, these are the heroes, these are the world-class players in this particular area, because they came up with all these individual theories. Now we're going to concentrate on just a few of them, okay? The first one is, and probably the most important one in this area that you'll end up maybe using pieces out of, is the Bowen, B-O-W-E-N, Family Systems Theory. And it's based on triangles. Remember I explained about the whole triangulation thing is? Okay, they're dealing with triangles. They're dealing with nuclear family emotional issues. What does that mean? They're looking at emotional distance. That's like they'll talk about the fact that, okay, what's going on here is that this person wants the relationship less than this person, so this person is chasing the other one down the street. The more this one wants the relationship, the more this one's afraid of it, so this one is moving. It's an approach avoidance type of issue. Marital conflict. Dysfunction of a spouse, impairment of children. Those are the emotional issues that they look for. Family projection process. Anxiety about the children. Okay. You know you can live your life through your children? That can be part of the system. What's really interesting about this, sometimes that actually works. There's a dad that really feels, well, I want my kid to be this particular thing, and therefore they start training when they're 2 years old. And they actually are able to get to much greater heights than anybody else. But how many kids do you think might go against that? See, if the parent is doing this and the kid is reacting this way, we might understand the kid by what's going on inside of the parent. The family projection process. That is what? The parent is projecting their issues on the kid. They're so worried that the kid's going to turn out like them. They're so worried that the kid is going to have the same issues that they have that they actually project. It's really the parent's issues, but it's really being projected on that kid. Differentiation of self. We talked about that a bit. That means what? Do I have my own identity? Am I a whole person, or am I just a people pleaser? Am I just controlled by what you do? Am I a chameleon? Do I change colors? In this class, you act just fine. You fit in as the perfect little Christian with your nice little halo and your wings and so on and so forth. But you also fit in perfectly at the bar and at the strip joint, right? That's what we're talking about there. If you change, instead of you're the same person wherever you go, you're differentiated if you are a separate whole that doesn't change, okay, wherever you go. the multi-generation transmission process. There's a whole thing here where you go back and get the history and you lay it out. It's called a genogram. I'm not going to take time to explain all of it. They have all these diagrams, so it looks like computer programming. They have squares and circles of all the parents and so on. And what do they say? We're going to find your problems in your generations, because this generation had a problem with alcohol. When we lay out your generation, we'll draw a line straight through it. From this generation to that generation to that generation, that's going to continue going if you don't deal with this in your life. Codependency, addictions, sexual problems, those are all multi-generational type of things. And of course the Bible says that. What? The problems go to the third and fourth generation? Same thing happened. That's what they're talking about here. Emotional cutoff. What is that? How many have been in a relationship with the other person in the relationship, you start talking or something and they just go blank, or they leave? Or they don't show any emotions. Why would a person not show emotions? They don't care. That'd be interpretation.
They can show that they're wrong.
Okay. They're afraid. It's usually, though, a fear inside of themselves, isn't it? If I let you know about me, if I become vulnerable to you, you will reject me. Or you won't like me. But it can be different. I have a particular client, and this client, we finally figured out what's going on. This guy shows no emotion at all, doesn't express himself at all, and hardly any what? What's the problem? Growing up, he would, even playing video games, or playing basketball, he would just blow his top. And of course, how well do you play basketball when you're just an angry rageaholic? So what did he do? He just cut off all his emotions, so he doesn't show any at all today. In response to his fear that he would get out of hand, he went clearly the other direction and doesn't show any emotion at all. He's emotional cut off. How do you think his wife likes it? Also, of course, he's afraid that his wife is going to reject him if he really opened up and so on, that she's critical, and we'd have all these kind of problems there. Sibling position. We already talked about that, of which kid. This is all part of Bowen theory. I'm putting all the pieces together here. And the emotional forces of society. Those are the issues that Bowen looked at, and he developed all these counseling techniques and these methods for handling. So if he was sitting there and you had Murray Bowen here as your counselor, or your model counselor, what would he be doing? He'd be looking in your family of origin stuff and looking for all this and trying to put together this big system of all of your relatives, where you fit in the family, the different things that are going on here, and then try and figure out the system and then try and deal with those issues. The next one is what's called structural family therapy. Salvador Minuchin. Families relate according to certain not explicitly stated arrangements or structure. So his idea is what? We have all this structure out here, and that structure is what actually is causing the problem. I'll give you an example. According to this theory, if we have a problem with incest in the family, what are we going to be looking for structurally? If we diagram the family, we're going to find we have the dad, but the mom has taken the place of a kid, and one of the female kids, probably the firstborn, has taken the place of the mom. And the mom is seen as incompetent, and the kid is seen as competent. So the dad is relating to this kid like he would relate to his wife, and that's why we have incest. So if we're doing that structurally, what would we want to do to help out this family from a structural theory standpoint? What do we have to do? We'd have to join with the mom and prove to the family and change the mom's status in the family to become the mom again, and take the kid and put the kid back to being the kid again. To see how structural what they would do? And what's going on? They would see it as a structural problem in the family. Of course, we would see it, what else? We have some other real issues inside the dad, obviously, and inside the kid that's going to have to be dealt with. So one of the terms they use is joining. How would they do that? They would join as part of the family. Like they instead of acting like the counselor, it means like they join the family, and they're now pointing out all the good things about the mom. And trying to get and then maybe playing with the kid to make the kid more like a kid. They deal with resistance. Why would you have resistance in a structural situation like this? What was the term we used? Homeostasis, right? What's the system going to do if I try to change the structure of the system? It's going to resist me. It's going to try to go back to the way it was. Relabeling. That's sort of like reframing, but I'm going to look at it differently than what you're looking at to get you to see it differently. Enactment. You come in and say, well, what happened in the family this week? Oh, we had this fight about this and this and this. Okay, let's go back to that and let's work that through and let's figure out how we should have done that. That's what's called enactment. Unbalancing. That's what I was talking about. Remember, we're all together? We're going to get in the system and we're going to unbalance the system. The system is balanced. So we're going to go over here and we're going to put a whole bunch of weight, say, on the kid's side of the system, which is going to make that heavier. Now the parents are going to react. Boundaries. Have you ever heard of boundaries? Well, boundaries is a big part of structure. You just didn't know you were doing structural theory, see? When you were setting boundaries, because boundaries do what? Change the structure of the overall family, of what's going on. And finally, paradoxical intentions. This is it's a dangerous thing to do, but as a last resort, it sometimes works. I'll give you an idea of a paradoxical intention in family structure theory and how you would do it. The true story, I had a couple a long time ago, family actually, and the problem was this daughter, who was like a freshman in high school, was dating this senior, and the parents thought that was too much age. They tried to stop the relationship, but the more they tried to stop the relationship, what happened? What do you think, structurally? They got stronger and stronger, and of course they're saying, well, we're going to get married and all this kind of stuff, and the more the parents resisted, it was getting to the place that the daughter was climbing out of her window at 3 o'clock in the morning to meet this guy. What do you think the parents were concerned about? She's going to end up pregnant. And they tried everything to try and change the structure, but the structure resisted. So I finally said, well, would you like to try a paradoxical intention? Realize if this fails, you're going to be in real trouble. So what you need to do is go to your kids and you say, you know, the truth is we don't think you should get married. The truth is we think this is a real negative thing. It's not going to work out for you. But we see that you're absolutely set on this. So we're going to help you. So you'll get married this Sunday. And Mama's going to take the daughter out and get her the wedding dress and do all of these kind of things. And Dad is going to take the boy out, you know, and help him pick out a car and a place to live and so on and so forth. And the idea is what? You got to do this really fast. See, we have pushing against each other structurally. What do you have to do? And it had to be real fast. I mean, they had to drive it, you know, and so on. But what are the kids going to find out? See, they're not going to listen before that. But what are they going to find out when they go out and try and get an apartment? A little bit of money, huh? How about a car? Are these kids really ready to get married? What do you have to do? You push them so much into the situation that before they got to the weekend, they were saying, stop, what are you doing? You guys are going crazy. Leave us alone. We don't want to get married. We're not old enough. Quit that. But what's the danger? The danger is they might go along with you. And then they're going to blame you for it, right? When you never use paradoxical intentions, if the person is psychotic, or has mental type problems, because who knows how this is going to come out. Or if they're suicidal. You never use that kind of stuff where you do the opposite to turn it around. But can you see how that's structural change? See, these are all methods of changing the structure of the system. You notice we weren't doing anything to change how the kids thought, were we? We were just putting pressure on the system and making the system go so fast that it went into reverse. Strategic family therapy has to do with the balance of power. It's a whole other area. And it has to do with the balance of power. You might not realize it, but there are a lot of families where either one person is very powerful and the other person is very powerless, right? And it can be the male or the female in that relationship. Or it can even be the kids. I've had a situation before when a 3-year-old was running the family. What does that tell you? We have a power problem, don't we? And what are we going to have to do? Take the power away from the 3-year-old and give it back to the parents. Doesn't sound too brilliant, but that's what you have to do in that. So anyway, you're using your power to change the power structure in the family. One more topic we want to look at here. Healthy, constructive, functional versus unhealthy, destructive, and dysfunctional families. What did dysfunctional families do to us? They mess up everybody, don't they? Because they're dysfunctional. Kids growing up in a dysfunctional family turn out how? Dysfunctional. And functional kids growing up in a functional family turn out how? Functional is a general rule, right? It's that simple. So what do they look like? And we get that all the time. When we're dealing with boundaries as an example, I'll say there are two groups of people that know nothing about the subject of boundaries. The first is the group of people that grew up in a very healthy family. And they're assertive and they do boundaries perfectly, although they have no idea what the terms are or how they function, because how did they learn? Their parents all had good boundaries, and so they have good boundaries, and they just do it automatically. You sort of learned it like you just watch somebody, you don't know the rules of basketball, but you see somebody playing basketball and you figure out how to get the ball in the hoop, right? What's the other group? Totally dysfunctional. Their boundaries have been run over, they've been abused, everything else has gone on in their families. How much do they know about boundaries? Never even seen them. You haven't got a clue. So a lot of this stuff has to do with what's going on. So what does it look like? In the marital relationship, if the marriage is healthy, the family will be healthy. You see, again, we're talking about the whole system of a family rather than the individual people in the family. So, if you're working with a family, what's the first thing you're going to want to do? Get the marriage healthy, right? If the marriage isn't healthy, are we going to have a healthy family? No matter what you do, we're not going to. Power displacement. Those making the decisions hold the power. We have to balance that out. Many times we have to really work because sometimes the wife feels absolutely powerless, and we need to balance that out. Family cohesiveness and flexibility. They must be close but not stuck together, not enmeshed or disengaged. Again, those are just all the terms. What's the term for this that we use all the time? Codependency. They must not be codependent, right? That's all we're saying here. They can't be too disengaged, they can't be too independent, and they can't be too enmeshed, they can't be too dependent. Communication. Healthy families have communication that is direct and clear. They don't play all these funny little games back and forth, you know, like, well, you should have known what I wanted, so I'm mad at you because you didn't do it. No, you ask particularly for what you want. Problem solving. How families deal with stress shows its strength or its weakness. Unhealthy families are rigid or chaotic. Yes, a rigid family is just as unhealthy as a chaotic family. They can't change, they can't flex with what's going on and the changes in life. Feelings are okay and can be expressed. In unhealthy families, They freeze and they stuff their feelings. Why? Because the other one's going to be angry. Dealing with change or loss. Healthy families can flex and survive. No matter what, if somebody loses their job, they all work together to solve the overall problem. Family values. They share a common set of beliefs and worldview. Adjustments in the value system are openly discussed. And capacity for intimacy and autonomy. Encourage closeness as well as autonomy and can communicate at the feeling level. Those are the core things of a healthy family. Areas of analysis and systems theory. And so I'm just going to give you a list now, putting this all together of the different things that are critically important. So put this down, okay? The first thing is cohesion. That's the enmeshed versus the disengaged, or the term we use around here mostly is the codependency. It's all a system thing. Adaptability. Chaotic versus rigid. If you've talked about the prepare and enrich test, okay, that particular test has a diagram in the back of it that has the enmeshed versus the disengaged and the rigid versus the flexible, and by plotting that you can get an idea about the entire family. Communication, clarity of expression. What you mean to say, what you actually say, what others hear, what others thinks he hears, what the other says about what you said, and what you think about the other said about what you said. Role structure. Anyone hear about what's called transactional analysis? Somebody ever heard about that before? What about transactional analysis? It says in every relationship there are 3 roles you play when you communicate. You're either a parent, an adult, or a child. So what happens? Let's say you're talking to your wife or your husband, and you say, you didn't do that right. I mean, you know, put those dishes right in this dishwasher. How are you coming across? What's your role? Parent. And how does your mate feel? Like a child. And what are they going to do to you next? They're going to come back parent-child to you. You did parent-child to them, so they're going to say, what are you telling me to do? It was your job to do the dishwasher. I mean, what in the world are you thinking about here? Next time you clean those dishes before you stick with the dishwasher and you put them in here right and you don't talk to me about the dishwasher. And those are conflicts you see all the time that are going on. And if you do this parent-child stuff, what should it look like? Keep your right role. If you're a parent, don't become a child when you're dealing with a child. If you're an adult, what if the husband comes to the wife as a parent-child? Not going to work. Needs to be adult-adult, isn't it? And those are things, again, you identify that's the part of the system we got to fix. This part of the system, so that's what we're going to do. The very last thing I want to talk about is life script. Again, this is all from family systems theory. What is a life script? It is what you, not overtly, but covertly, and they didn't even know they were doing it, your family has told you you are to do with your life. As an example, in many families, and I've had clients like this, the message they had is to be a successful woman, you have to get married and have kids and have a successful family. Now, what if that lady doesn't get married and she's a good top executive in a company? What's going to happen? It's not going to work. Life script basically says, here's a line, and I don't care what you choose to do. You're going to eventually come back to that line, or you're not going to feel that you succeeded in life and it's going to work for you. I was taking an advanced marriage and family course, and the instructor told about this story. And she was teaching on life scripts like this. And one of the students just freaked out. I mean, she couldn't stand it. She left the classroom. She just broke down emotionally and just couldn't handle it. Because it had dawned on her the life script of her family. And she had a son. The life script of that family to the men was, live dangerously, die young. And every man in that family had died in mountain climbing accidents, airplane crashes, living on the edge until you fell off the edge. And she realized that was the life script of her family for her son. What if that doesn't get changed? What's going to happen? He's not going to be happy in life until he gets killed by a roadside bomb in Iraq. What's he going to do? He's going to take on all the hardest, all the most difficult, whatever there is out there, and he's going to keep pressing it and pressing it, because that is the message that that family gave. I have a question for you. What is your life script? Think about it, figure it out, because until you change that, you're not going to be happy in life. Now, we believe God has a life script, right? And you need to find the center of God's will. Today we talk about a lot of interesting stuff. You can learn a lot more about it. It's just an overview. But can you see there's a different way of looking at marriage and family therapy from a system perspective? That's right. Lord, we thank you that you have it all under control and you have all the answers. And Lord, you've allowed us, different people, to come up with different ideas of how to look at things. And there's just so much that we can learn, Lord. Help us to learn it and to use it effectively. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other.